Good morning, everyone. Okay. Well, we are going to get started soon. I have some handouts being passed out. Should just be one sheet of paper. I have a really bad habit of using Islamic terms and not defining them. So in order to kind of mitigate that problem, I've created a little bit of a definition sheet. It should have most of the words I'm going to use. And so if you hear something and you don't know what it means, it should be on here, hopefully. If you don't have one, raise your hand, and one of the two people passing that should be able to get one to you. So while we are continuing to pass these out, I think I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. One of the questions I got most often when I said I was teaching this class is, why Islam? That's kind of a weird topic to kind of focus on. And I do agree with that, but it was really interesting. I discovered a lot of things about Islam while I was studying it. It all started when I was in high school. I read this book called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. It's written by Nabil Qureshi. It's a pretty good book, and it really baffled me because it was so weird. They believe so many very differing things than we do, and the religion is kind of messy, honestly. And I just really struggled to understand how, something this crazy could actually be believed by so many people. So I kind of went down the rabbit hole, started studying, all sorts of stuff. I listened to a whole lecture series by that Nabil Qureshi from Biola, and I'm like, well, that was a waste. I'm never going to use this in my life. It's not like, I'm ever going to run into, Muslims in America. And then I went to college. I went to University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, and I was in the civil engineering department. And the highest demographic there is Middle Easterners. So that was a little bit of a shock to me. But while I was there, I was fortunately able to use some of the stuff I've studied and learned and be able to interact with these people and kind of also continue to grow and witnessing and talking to them. And I found that there tends to be a surprising amount of potholes that either myself and many other Christians who work with Muslims have fallen into. So in this class, I hope to kind of also help you understand what Islam is and kind of the aspects of it, but also help avoid some of these, what I'm calling potholes. Because there's actually a few of them, if you step into them, they will just turn off and not want to talk to you at all anymore. So it can be a little damaging. So I'm not trying to scare you, not want to force you off from I don't want to, turn someone off entirely. But I just want to see if I can kind of help you, guide you through some of that process. But today we're going to focus mostly on the history of Islam. So I want to go over a little bit of a review from last week. For those of you who were here, Jordan went over Jonah. But I find that the Great Commission is kind of a good summary of that. Go out into all nations, which includes the Arabs. So if, people are led to go witness to Muslims, you don't want to be like Jonah and be scared or even sometimes angry when they convert. It can be, you don't want to be angry about that with them. So I have 4 major points for this week. I don't know if we're going to cover them all, but we're going to go over why it's important to reach out for Muslims and some of the cautionary stuff from that. What is Islam and how does one become a Muslim? It's actually surprisingly easy. We're going to look at a brief look into the history of Muhammad because he tends to be a very important character in the whole religion. And we're going to look into, if time permits, we'll look into some of the major theological aspects of the religion. So, here's some numbers to ponder. There are actually 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. They are the second biggest religion, first, of course, being Christianity, but that number also includes Catholics. So, kind of give you an idea of this is generally a very coherent religion. They very much believe the same thing, have very much the same practices and structure. So it's a very surprisingly coherent religion for something so large. There are actually 3.5 million in the United States, Illinois has 350,000. We are actually the highest per capita state in the United States of Muslims. And as I mentioned earlier, I ran into a lot at University of Illinois. Well, Champaign County, where that's located, is the second largest population by county. The first is, of course, Cook. But the third is Sangamon. So we have the third largest population in Illinois. So I find that very interesting. Their growth rate is 70%. They do tend to grow very fast. This number comes from birth rates. That's analogous to their birth rates. It's very often a young woman will get married off at like 15 to 20 and have about 5 to 7 kids before she's 30. It's actually kind of surprising, but that's where a lot of their growth rate comes from. It's actually not new converts. They have more children, which grows the religion. But Jordan mentioned this last week. The apostasy rate is estimated between 25 and 50%. That means people who are leaving the religion, and unfortunately, very often, many of them go to atheism. The reason I use the term apostasy is because that there are these things in Islamic countries called apostasy laws. These are laws directed at people who leave the religion, and very often, many of them require the death of the person who leaves. This comes from Muhammad and the Quran, where they said you need to kill all people who leave the religion because they will be a blight on the land. So they believe that if you have too many people who are Muslim, the land will actually become cursed where they're staying at. So they are very much want a monoculture, mono-religion country. And that also leads to a common problem of where many Christian missionaries have ran into. The time it takes from a Muslim to become a Christian is about 7 years. So that mostly comes from if you become a Christian, or even if you just leave Islam, most of the time your entire family will disown you. It is a bad outlook if you have, say, a son, and he leaves Islam, and you still associate with him, that many other Muslims will shame you and tell you you need to stop doing that. And it, of course, is punishable by death, as we mentioned earlier. And they also revoke the entire culture. Often many of these Middle Eastern countries are built upon Islam. That's their culture, that's their people. It's not just a religion, it's a culture, it's a way of life, it's rules for how you do legal systems. There we go. You do legal systems, all of that. It's all wrapped into one thing. So if you say, hey, you need to leave, they're revoking basically their entire life and a lot of what they believe. So that's why you need to kind of approach it cautiously. Many Christian missionaries will say, the number one effective way of reaching out to Muslims is first being their friend, having a relationship. So if they do leave Islam, they at least have someone to rely upon, and also having a Christian family. I mean, if you remember where it says, Jesus says, everyone who leaves mother, father, and son will have ample more, and in the body of Christ. That's very true for Muslims. They leave all these things, but they should find basically the body of Christ coming in to fill that void. So it's very important to remember that as you witness to them. So I want to go over a little bit of a brief distinction between Western versus Eastern. This is kind of a term that's thrown out a lot. Western Islam is generally seen as liberal Islam. That's not the political party. That means they have liberal beliefs. They're often more focused on the culture than the actual religion. Sometimes they even want to cut faith out entirely, and they will be quick to drop anything that they consider unsavory from the religion or the culture if it, to help its political or its cultural growth. Eastern, on the other hand, the reason it's called Western is because that originates from the Western countries, so Europe in America, that's where this kind of starts from. So that's why it's called Western Islam. Eastern, on the other hand, originates, of course, from the Middle East, and it's kind of what is more prominent in Asia and the Middle East, but it's the original Islam, very conservative, very much how Muhammad had Islam when he first started the religion. So you'll find that mostly in the Middle East and the closer Asian countries to the Middle East. The further you get away, they get more, they start adding things in. So where the Nelsons are, they have actually animalistic worship also built into Islam. So it's kind of its own unique thing. So going over what is Islam, I find it can be hard to understand what this is. The word literally translates to submission. So it means submission to the God Allah. That is their main God. The prophet Muhammad, so he is the person who received Allah's wisdom and then gave it to his people. And these wisdoms and teachings are compiled in a book called the Quran. I'm sure many of you know what the Quran is. It's their sacred book. That's where they learn about Muhammad, his teachings, what his life was like, what Allah expects from his people, and how to worship him properly. It's actually a very legalistic religion. It's very much built upon tradition. You do what you're told. You don't correct your heart attitude. You do what you're told, and you do it to please Allah. It doesn't matter if you really dislike doing it, if you don't really want to be involved with this. It doesn't matter. You do it because Allah told you to, and that's what's important. It's actually very orally based. I find this is a mistake a lot of people tend to make when approaching Muslims and also interacting with them. They take speaking and teaching given from their leaders, which are called imams. That's like they're kind of their pastors. And that's what they believe is truth. They don't read the Quran. Very few actually do. Only if you are studying and wanting to become imam yourself, you don't do a Quran study like how you do a Bible study. You're told what to believe, how you work and or how you worship and how you praise Allah. And so if that doesn't necessarily, if that in the West, you have a lot of imams kind of contradicting the Quran because they don't want to teach the violence and they don't want to teach these unsavory parts of the religion. They want to focus on what they deem to be more acceptable. So that's where you can get these kind of more distinct groups. The Quran has one message, kind of. It has one message, but it really depends on who is the one teaching it. So in order to become a Muslim, you have to say the Shahada. That's how you say that word. It's really weird. But it is their profession of faith. That's what those squiggly lines are up there. That's it in Arabic. In English is there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger or prophet. You actually have to say it in Arabic to become a Muslim, which is, of course, that up there. But that's their, I called it their profession of faith, but they say it very much kind of as like this is a rallying cry, what they tell their children, how they, when they're feeling in distress, they'll say this. Sometimes they'll say it before and after prayers. It's kind of a lot of centralized, if you boil the religion down, that's what it is. I remember when I was reading that book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, Nabil would talk about how his father, as a baby, he would rock him and he'd whisper in his ear the Shahada. That's how important it is to their religion. It's to try to help get more converts and to teach their children that way. So we kind of talked about Muhammad a little bit, but he is the man at the center of the religion. He is the primary prophet. What a lot of people don't know is that they actually believe all of the Old Testament prophets. They would claim Jesus is a prophet, and they kind of believe what he teaches, but they would teach that Muhammad is the final and the greatest of all the prophets. So that's who he is in their religion. he received, through his life after receiving the first surah, he received the Quran as piecemeal until his death. He would take it, so he would receive it either in like a dream or in a kind of like a seizure-like state. He would come back and he would give it to his followers, and then they would memorize it and then recite it. So he would give it to them, they would take it to heart, and then repeat it back to him until they had it right, and then they'd go spread it out that way. Again, that all continued until his death in 632 AD. He believed that he was actually a descendant of Abraham. It's why often Muslims, and especially the more Arab you are, they will call themselves Ishmaelites, because they believe they descend from the line of Ishmael. We'll get into that later, but it's actually, there's very little evidence to prove that Muhammad and a lot of the Arabs actually descended from them. He is the standard for all Muslims to imitate. So, as you know, as Christians, we are called to imitate Christ. Muslims are called to imitate Muhammad. In Surah 33:21, indeed, in the messenger of Allah, you have an excellent example for whoever has hope in Allah on the last day and remembers Allah often. So they want to be like Muhammad. So looking at his life, what he did, and how he interacted with people is very much how Muslims are supposed to act. And they often do look at him and history to see what they should do. So, I went the wrong way. So that's why we're going to look at the history of early Islam. We're going to look at the life of Muhammad from when he first received his revelation till his death later on. And that starts in 610. How it starts is Muhammad is meditating in a cave. It doesn't specify what he's meditating on. And what they say is an angel by the name of Jibril comes and visits him. Jibril commands Muhammad to recite. Muhammad responds, I don't know how. And then this Jibril embraces him. And this embrace was said to almost bring Muhammad to the brink of death. So it's very violent and very painful embrace. This actually occurs 3 times, and then after the 3rd time, Jibril gives him the first part of Surah 96. So he receives his first revelation. At first, he was very much against anything involving this Jibril, the God Allah, and teaching his teachings. So he actually tries to commit suicide a few times, but Jibril stops him until his wife, Khadijah, convinces him, hey, you're a prophet. You need to go out and spread this teaching. So that's when he starts teaching Islam. In the beginning, it's actually peaceful. There is a lot of working with the polytheists in Mecca at the time. He lived in Mecca when he started. He works with them. He tries to convert them to Islam, but they're very resistant. By the end of this time period, there's only about 75 Muslims. They're mostly family and friends of Muhammad. But he's, at this time, the polytheists want to kick him out because he's actually hurting their bottom dollar. There's this, the Muslims call it like a temple, but there's this thing in Mecca called the Kaaba. It's just a giant cube. And the polytheists would come in, they would have their little idols, they'd bring them in, put them around the Kaaba and worship them there, maybe take a few idols back home. So it was a trade network. They would come in, collect, or bring their idols, trade with the people there, get a new one, take it back home with them, and that's how they would work. Well, he was preaching monotheism, so there's only one God. All of this other stuff is fake and not worth even working with and whatnot. So the polytheists were like, hey, we need to get rid of him. Well, he's actually protected by this time by his uncle. He's saying, no, you can't kick him out. He's with me. And he actually had a lot of power in the city at the time. So he keeps the polytheists from kicking him out. But during this time period, he's very much peaceful, wants people to come to his religion and join him. So you see things like in Surah 2:256, it says, "Let there be no compulsion in religion, for the truth stands out clearly from falsehood. So whoever renounces false gods and believes in God has certainly grasped the finest unfailing handhold, and God is the all-hearing, all-knowing." So he says things like there's no compulsion to join Islam. There is, you need to come willingly, but we're not going to force you. But at the end by 622, Muhammad's uncle dies, and that's when the polytheists kick him out and say, "Hey, leave. We don't want you here anymore." So Muhammad moves down to Medina. So that's a city kind of close by. He moves down there, and there's actually a lot of strife in the city. There's 3 Jewish tribes and also a bunch of Arabs. So he's accepted as actually a political leader. So in the last time he was a prophet, now he becomes a political leader. So the 3 Jewish tribes accept him because he's a monotheist, and he claims to be in the line of prophets as, the prophets they believe in. And the Arabs accept him because he's ethnically an Arab. So they like that. They start to gain more converts and also more power. A lot of the Arabs actually that were in Medina start converting to Islam. But there's also still strife during this time. And this is where you have what's called the transitional period. So from when Muhammad goes from being more peaceful to more violent. The Meccans have trade caravans that come through near Medina. And Muhammad starts commanding his followers to attack these trade caravans and steal the stuff that they were bringing into Mecca. That really annoys the Meccans, so they start having conflict between one another, and I think there's like 3 battles in this time. So in this time period, 2 of the 3 Jewish tribes are kicked out of Medina, but the final one stays until the very end in 629, where they have the Battle of the Trenches. So the Meccans attack Medina. Their sole purpose is to eliminate Islam and kill Muhammad. Muhammad has his followers dig trenches. That's where the name of the Battle of the Trenches comes from. And they're able to repel the Meccans. So they beat the Meccans. They are driven out. And what Muhammad finds out is that the last Jewish tribe sought to help the Meccans take Medina. And when he finds that out, he goes to punish the tribe. So his final act in this period is beheading all of the men that were in the Jewish tribe and then selling all the women and children into slavery. That's how this time period ends. So that's when he finally transitions over. So you go from the peaceful in 622 to the very violent in 629. So I find that Surah 3:28 is kind of evident of how this time period is. Believers should not take disbelievers as friends instead of believers, and whoever does so have nothing to hope for in Allah, unless it is a precaution against their tyranny. And Allah warns you about himself, and to Allah is the final return. So they start pulling away from people who are not around them. They start to other the disbelievers, as they call them. They start to kind of have their own group, and they don't want to deal with people outside of it. But you still see, what I find surprising during this time is you still see Muhammad is affirming the Torah and the gospel. So in Surah 5:46 and 47, then in the footsteps of the prophets, we sent Jesus, son of Mary, confirming the Torah revealed before him, and we gave him the gospel containing guidance and light and confirming what is revealed in the Torah, a guide and the lessons of God, fearing so. Let the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed in it, and those who do not judge by what Allah has revealed in it are truly the rebellious. So what that's kind of a word salad, but what that's saying is that we are supposed to judge Islam by what the gospel teaches us. It's not very good luck if you're being biblically accurate for it. So Muhammad's saying all these things, but he starts to develop a hatred for Jews and Christians. Because of this, he says, hey, look at the Gospels. They'll confirm I'm a prophet. You're supposed to follow me. And the Christians and the Jews looked at the Gospel and the Torah, and they said, it doesn't say you're a prophet. You're making this up. So that's when he starts developing a hatred for them. Many Jews and Christians say, hey, we don't want to deal with you at all. We don't believe you're a prophet. So that's why when we hit 629 up into his death in 632, Muhammad acts as a warlord. So we have prophet, political leader, warlord. This is where the violence really goes into Islam. So they leave they leave Medina to Mecca. They're marching over there. And if you remember at the time, back in ancient times, where people would believe that if you had a god and you beat another nation, your god is superior and stronger to that god. So as they're moving, the Muslims defeated a much stronger nation, Mecca, and so a lot of the Arab tribes of the nation convert to Islam and join them. So they march to Mecca, and they conquered the city pretty easily. They have superior numbers, superior people, but most of the people in the city end up converting to Islam. They wanted to live, of course. They wanted to continue their lives. So they convert to Islam, become Muslims, and the ones who aren't are either driven out or killed. So they take over Mecca. They now have the city that they've wanted. They clear out all the idols from the Kaaba. They now worship there. That's where people actually pray to when Muslims pray. They pray facing the Kaaba. And so that's when they start to choose to start conquering outside of their area. So they move into further Middle Eastern areas to gain more land and people and political power. And so in this time period, they are very, very violent. So you have things like this: fight those who do not believe in Allah on the last day, nor comply with Allah and his messenger have forbidden, nor embrace the religion of truth from among the people of the book until they pay the jizya, while willingly submitted and feel themselves subdued. So that's Surah 923. That is, the people of the book are Christians. That's what they called us. In that time period, books were not very common, and most of the time, if you had a book, you're probably a Christian, and it was the Bible. So that's why Muhammad calls them the people of the book. The jizya is a specific tax that Christians are required to pay in Muslim countries, and they are supposed to be subdued. So in Islam, in these final years, you either are subdued and pay the taxes or you die. Those are the two options from this time period. And then there's other such things like Surah 9, 123, O believers, fight the disbelievers around you and let them find firmness in you and know that Allah is with those mindful of him. So it's very much fight the people around you. So they go from peaceful to violent now. And so as we wrap up history, I just want to quickly touch on Muhammad's death. I find it very interesting. So there is this Jewish settlement called Kedar. I think that's how you pronounce it. At this place, the Muslims attack them unsuspectedly. They were going out, they have, I believe it was date fields, and they were going out to work in the fields to pick their dates and go back in, and Muhammad attacks them while they're coming out of the city and utterly destroys them. So there's this Jewish woman that is living there at the time, and her entire family is wiped out. Her brother, her uncle, and her father are all killed by the Muslims as they conquer the city. So she takes it upon herself to deal with Muhammad. So she cooks him a meal. That's what Ibn Sa'id is saying right here. Verily, a Jewish woman prepared poisonous meat of the she-goat for the apostle of Allah. He took a piece of it, put it in his mouth, chewed it, and threw it away. And he said to the companions, halt. Verily, its leg tells me that it is poisoned. And he sent for the Jewish woman and asked her, what induced you to do what you have done? She replied, I wanted to know if you are true. In that case, Allah would surely inform you. And if you are a liar, I shall relieve the people of you. So her whole plan was, if I poison you and you know beforehand, then you are a prophet. If not, you're going to die and we'll be rid of you. So this is how his life ends. I have Bukhari here. Yeah, I can say that, which is a hadith collection. We'll cover hadiths probably by next week. But he's talking to one of his wives, Aisha, and he says that he is basically confirming that the poison at Kedar is what is killing him. It takes about 3 years from when he eats the poison leg of the lamb to when he actually dies. And about 5 days before he dies, there's a lot of, when you look up the last words of Muhammad, there's like a lot of what they claim to be his last words. There's like a whole sermon he preaches and then he dies. There's this other thing where he says, Allah take me, and then he dies. And then there's this where he says, in the last moments of the prophet was heard, he was drawing a sheet over his face, but when he felt uneasy, he removed it from his face and said, Allah's damnation be on the Jews and the Christians who make the graves of the prophets object of worship. So when you look into what his final words are, there's a lot of stuff about it. But some of them include basically saying a curse on us because we don't accept Islam. So I find his final words to be very apt for how he ended his life. So up here we have a map of the Islamic conquest of the time. Oh, yes.
Do you find that most Muslims are ignorant of how Muhammad died?
Very much so. A lot of the ones I ran into are so if you didn't hear his question, he asked, do I find that most Muslims are very ignorant of how Muhammad died? So if we go back, the records of his death are found in the Hadith and also Ibn Sa'd or Sa'id. There's a lot of ways of pronouncing that. But these are very much texts, like extra Quranic texts that many people would own but haven't read. There's the Ibn Sa'd, I cannot say this word correctly, Sa'd, is a biography of Muhammad's life. And these are all extra Quranic things that if they don't read the Quran, they're very unlikely to read these things. So there's very much kind of a lot of unknowing of what the Quran actually says, the life of Muhammad, and how they act, especially here in the West. So I find a funny quote from Nabil Qureshi on this, where he says, his sister would quote Oprah thinking she was quoting Muhammad. So there is a lot of unknown and a lot of there's not a lot of knowledge on these subjects, which I do find to be a kind of more saving grace of them, because if you don't know it, then you're you don't know you're called to kill Christians, then you're not going to go do that. So yeah. But I thought I saw a question over here. Yeah. Yes. It is a long time, but he didn't eat a lot of it. It says he just chewed it in his mouth and spat it out. We don't actually know what she used to poison him. It could be. So a lot of the records of Muhammad's death are written by Muslims about 100 to 200 years after his death. Both, I think, Bukhari was written about 740 to 760, and Ibn Sa'd was written about 800. So it could be a convenient way of blaming the Jews for Muhammad's death. The records of the time aren't known, so it very may well be apocryphal. There's actually a lot of apocryphal or stuff that came later that was made up about Muhammad. A lot of sayings and a lot of things. So very well maybe kind of early Islamic ways of trying to pin stuff on Jewish people. But that's unfortunately conjecture. We can't say whether or not that's what the sources tell us. So here we have the Islamic conquest. I don't know why they made them all green. I'm sorry if you're colorblind. I am also. It is not very fun to look at. So the darker green, oh, you can't see my mouse. Okay. So if you kind of, right next to the Red Sea, there's a dark green. That's the conquest that happened during the time of Muhammad. You have, of course, Medina and Mecca on there, and I think that's Qadar's not on there, unfortunately. And then the lighter green are the what some of the first caliphates started doing. That's like a religious and political leader of the Muslim people. So you have the caliphates, and then, of course, as you know, they eventually conquer their way into Spain, to then later be driven out by Queen Isabella, right? Thank you, love. So I want to go over why I find history to be important when it comes to Islam. It gives you a glimpse of how Islam was practiced and how Muslims today are supposed to act, because, of course, Muhammad is the example for Muslims. And there's also this theological principle of abrogation. So Surah 2, 106, if we ever abrogate a verse or cause it to be forgotten, we will replace it with a better or similar one. Do you not know that Allah is most capable of everything? So how this came about is I think it was two Muslims, and they were reading the Quran, the Quran wasn't written at the time. They were going over what they've memorized, and they were trying to figure out how two verses work with each other. They said, hey, these kind of seem like they contradict. So they go to Muhammad and ask him, hey, these two verses seem like they contradict. How do we work this out? So he says, I will go ask Allah, and he will tell me what to do. So then he receives Surah 2, and basically he says, you abrogate it. So what abrogation is that if you look at the history of Islam, and you have a verse that was revealed at this time and a verse that was revealed at this time, and they contradict each other. So if you take early, there's no compulsion in religion, and then later, kill all the disbelievers, the one that came later, further in history, abrogates or basically supersedes the prior. So when you hear Muslims, especially in the West, say, Islam's a peaceful religion, it's, here's this surah, there's no compulsion in religion. While that is true, it doesn't apply to this day because it's been abrogated by stuff that came further on. So that's why knowing history is important. And there's a whole catalog of how you can find where surahs were revealed. When you look at it, when you look at a surah, you have to kind of interpret, well, does this still apply today? Has this been abrogated? And the unfortunate truth is that all of the peaceful stuff that was originally in the religion has all been abrogated today. It's no longer, theologically for Islam, no longer should apply. So that's just some sad things to kind of think about when you're dealing with Muslims, especially in the West, where they try to focus more on early Islam. So also, I find its history is, of course, what is called the 3 stages of Islam. This was about, I think, in the 1900s, an Islamic philosopher came up with this whole idea called the 3 stages. So stage 1, you live peacefully and you try to gain converts, and as you grow, you move into stage 2, where you try to get more political power and try to seek special privileges until you reach stage 3, where you are the majority and it's basically you rule with an iron fist. So I have a little comic up there. Taqid is also called deception, and it's a very common thing where you look at where Muslims are in a nation, they seek special privileges until they're the majority, and then they rule with an iron fist, which is the unfortunate truth of how the religion works. But unfortunately, we spent a lot of time talking about the violence in Islam, and I find that there's 2 places where people can get slipped up when dealing with Muslims, and it's getting what I like stuck on the violence. While it is commanded in the Quran to kill Christians, so Muhammad specifically calls us to one instead, we are supposed to love these people and reach out to them. They would be classified as our enemies, and as you know, we're supposed to love those who persecute us. So, they are created in the image of God. These are people who, if they don't receive Christ, are damned to hell, unfortunately. which is sad. And so while there is a lot of violence, it is often, of course, left out in the West. So if you are here, you will probably be okay when dealing with a Muslim. But they often don't practice this violence on a regular basis. And I find being respectful of them, being kind, being nice, is a great way of reaching out to them. If you answer like aggression with peace and kindness, it really can break them. It is a very powerful tool. If you go in and you just go guns blazing, you just attack them, it will turn them off immediately. They won't even want to talk or deal with you. So I find that it can be you don't want to kind of focus on that. While we did talk about it a lot today, that is to give a historical basis. When you witness to them, you don't hold back on the truth. Don't deny that Islam is violent, but you do it in a loving and kind manner. And then, as they said, there's two things. The Crusades are another thing that is often brought up when talking to Muslims. It generally goes, you tell them that Islam's a violent faith, and they say, well, what about the Crusades? Christianity's violent. Hundreds and thousands of people died while the Crusades were happening, and that was all Christians, and they were commanded to do so by the Pope. And I find many Protestants slip up and say, well, that was the Catholics who did it, and I'm Protestant. And they have no idea what the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant is. They don't really know what you're talking about. They think you're all Christians, and so Christians did it, but you're a different type of Christians. So does that mean you're a less violent Christian? Kind of like how that goes. What I find is, what is the correct way of answering this is violence is not prescribed in the Bible while it is in the Quran. So you can go through where Jesus says, hey, you want to be peacemakers. You want to love your enemies. You want to help those who persecute you. You want to go through all of those things and prove to them that we are not commanded to be violent. And then you can start talking about, hey, the popes really walked away from the Bible when planning and doing the Crusades. While they are saying they have the authority of Scripture, there is no proof of that. So walking them through that instead of just saying we're different, they're not with us, they're not in our group, can really kind of affect how Muslims interact with interact with you. So it looks like we have about 6 minutes. Before we go on, are there any questions? Anyone have any questions about what I went over? Yes.
So they believe in the Old Testament. So when bringing that up, a lot of times they're going to bring up an example of the Old Testament where Israel conquered, and there's even examples of when Israel was told to leave no one living, leave nothing in the path.
Yeah. Yeah. So what he was asked, correct me if I got this right, but they will often go to the Old Testament for looking at violence in the Bible and where God commands nations to be wiped out and how that then is similar, and they don't really know the distinction between the Old and the New Testament, and then how that is a command for, or how they would claim that's a command for Jews and Christians to be violent. Does that, okay. So how I've actually dealt with that before and how I've responded, where I've seen to get kind of good feedback from it, is that the violence in the Old Testament is for specific people at a specific time to be committed by a specific group. So God commanded Joshua to take Israel at that time. It is not a wide sweeping and full, not for all of time eternity that you are supposed to go and conquer Israel. That was one time where God commanded, and he was using the Israelites to judge the sin of the people that were living there originally. In the Quran, they are commanded to kill all disbelievers. There's no stop to that. It's for until what is the last days, so until the end of the world. They are supposed to remove all unbelievers. They're supposed to eventually, before the last day can happen, they're supposed to conquer the whole world and try to create a like a whole world that worships Allah. So while there is of course killing and death in the Old Testament, it's not the same of what is in the Quran. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Dura. Oh, good question. So he asked, what is their view of our God and the Bible versus the God Allah? So I want to read one surah, and I got to remember. Okay, so I think I can answer your question with this one surah. Surah 29:46. Do not argue with the people of the book unless grateful, except with those of them who act wrongfully and say, we believe in what has been revealed to us and what was revealed to you. Our God and your God is only one, and in him we fully submit. So many times in the Quran, this is one example of it, but many times in the Quran it says that the God of the Torah and the gospel, it's called the Injil in Islam, is the same God that they worship. So they would personally believe that we all worship the same God. And while that is patently false, and we'll talk about that later as we go through further things later on, many people do believe that, where the Catholic Church actually says that we worship the same God as the Muslims. Many seculars do, because it's all built upon what they say, it's an Abrahamic religion. Well, it's not. The God Allah is not the same as the God of the Old and New Testament, as I'm sure you are aware. But they don't even pretend, they are so distinctly separated that even claiming that they are the same is really, really, it's really bad. Does that answer your question? Okay, sweet. Anyone else? We have about a minute left, so I don't think we'll get into the theology today. So, yes? Turkey would probably would be considered Eastern in their viewpoints, but it's turning more Western. They very much were very conservative in how they practice Islam, but it's very a lot of the more modern Middle Eastern countries are becoming more and more westernized in the sense of accepting more Western Islamic stuff. So how you can kind of tell whether or not if they're Eastern or Western is you ask them what's their view of people who leave the religion. If they're neutral to not really caring about them, that's kind of a good tell if they're Western. If they think they should be thrown in jail or killed or things like that, that's a kind of a more sign that they're Eastern. So if you go to a bigger city, you will find more Western Islam. If you go to more of the outside or like the country areas, it will be more that Eastern philosophy. Kind of similar to how Christianity is in America, where you have in big cities, there's these very liberal Christian churches, but as you go into the country, there's very much conservative, Bible-believing churches. Does that answer your question? Okay, so it's 11:16, which I think is about when we're supposed to leave. But anyone else have any more questions? Okay, I think we're good. Thank you all for coming here today. Next week, we will go over the kind of deeper theological points of Islam. So, thank you very much.